Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ringside Cinema. I am Money Mike, and this past Thursday, the wrestling world, the entertainment world, was shocked with the news of the passing of WWE Hall of Famer and really entertainment icon Hulk Hogan. As you know, these last couple days, I've been trying to figure out what to say in this video because I've been seeing a lot of mixed reactions, which is understandably so. I do think the idea that, people on the internet, fans, are forcing people to choose one side or the other, like you have to honor him or you can't honor him because of the things that Terry Bollea said, so therefore you can't honor the character or the legacy of Hulk Hogan, the wrestler. And to me, the way I want to break this video down is essentially I want to do both because I think there's a way that we can honor and celebrate the legacy of a man in which without Hulk Hogan, we would not be here talking wrestling today. There would not be WrestleMania 40 some years later. We would not be talking about these big stadium shows. WrestleMania being a 2-night event. SummerSlam this weekend, a 2-night event. We would not be talking about any of that if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan. And the 80s and the golden era of the 80s that led to the boom of professional wrestling. When Vince McMahon saw the vision for wrestling in the future of not being just a regional entertainment product, he saw it on a global scale, nationwide and soon to be global scale that we see still because of the expansion by Vince still rings true today. We have shows in all over the world, and none of that is possible without the success of Hulk Hogan, the character who truly became the first wrestler to really transcend the world of professional wrestling. When Vince McMahon needed that guy to lead the charge, Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea was the right guy at the right time, and on January 23rd, 1984, Hulkamania was born when he beat the Iron Sheik for the WWF Championship, and you could say the rest is history. Because over a year later, March 31st, 1985, the very first WrestleMania happened, but also the celebrity appearances that we see today can all be dated back to Hulk Hogan, the Rock and Wrestling connection with Cyndi Lauper, tag teaming with Mr. T in the very first main event. All of that can be dated, all of the celebrity stuff we've seen over the years can be dated back to Hulk Hogan, because Hulk Hogan, the character, transcended the world of professional wrestling. He was all over the place. He was larger than life. Wrestlers who came to the WWF back then, if they knew they wanted to work with Hogan. If they knew they were working with Hogan on a show, they knew it meant more money. So, Hogan was huge for the business of wrestling and taking it global in the 80s, in which now is the golden era that which we refer to. And those first few WrestleManias with matches against Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior, defeating Sergeant Slaughter at WrestleMania 7, and of course the iconic WrestleMania 3, body slamming Andre the Giant in front of 93,000 plus people. Now remember, this is 1987. So when you're getting 93,000, look, I know the number has been debated, but just go along with me here. 90 some thousand people at a time back then. It said a lot about the drawing power of Hulk Hogan. And as the golden era went on, and Hulkamania started to fade, so did Vince McMahon, because the steroid trial 1992 really changed the business, and Hogan was a key part of the steroid trial. Obviously, testified against Vince. Hogan went on interviews saying he never took steroids. There was this big thing, and it seemed like the boom period for wrestling was over. The honeymoon was over. It was just this big old thing for the 80s. Because after the steroid trial, professional wrestling took a hit. The image of pro wrestling took a hit. So that meant WWF and WCW also took a hit. People just weren't flocking to wrestling the way they were in the 80s. Well, let's turn to the guy who launched the boom period in the 80s, Hulk Hogan. Because it's very rare. Hogan's success in the ring will never be duplicated. He was the one that led the charge in the golden era. And then in July 7th, 1996, one leg drop to Macho Man Randy Savage, WCW, Bash at the Beach, Hogan would go on to launch the New World Order alongside Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and create the second boom period of professional wrestling in the 90s. Like a decade apart from after the golden era that was centered around Hulkamania. Hulk Hogan would go on to the WWF's rival in WCW and launch a second boom period just by becoming a heel. And he turned heel for the first time in his career. This was a pretty big deal. And at that point in the 90s, this was what wrestling needed. Hogan's heel turn, in a way, saved professional wrestling at that time period because it wasn't putting out the product that the fans wanted to see. So, if the third man was anyone else on that day in Daytona Beach, what would the state of wrestling look like, right? Because I don't think Sting, as much as I love Sting and he's an icon of his own, I don't think him being the third man would have had the same effect as Hulk Hogan. And because of what WCW did with Hulk Hogan forming the NWO, it forced Vince McMahon to get a little attitude. It created the Attitude Era in the WWE. It really revved up the Monday Night Wars. So without Hulk Hogan, the 80s taking, with Vince McMahon by his side, and I'll talk about Vince too and his legacy as well, because you can't talk about Hogan without talking about Vince and vice versa. But without Hogan in the 80s, Vince McMahon taking wrestling national, wrestling probably would not have went beyond a regional product. And after the steroid trial, Hulk Hogan saved professional wrestling in a way because it created a big boom period for 3-4 years until WWE bought WCW. That excited the fan base. It brought fans back because of the heel turn, the NWO, everything that Hogan did. Like everything seemingly ended up revolving around Hulk Hogan, the character, and pro wrestling itself. Like everything about pro wrestling is essentially because of Hulk Hogan. And after WCW was bought out by Vince McMahon, well, Hulk Hogan did come back to the WWE eventually, but in the NWO, because Vince wanted to poison his own company according to the storyline they were doing with Rick. He was doing with Ric Flair, who was the opposing general manager, and the fans weren't ready to boo Hulk Hogan. They were not ready to, boo Hogan coming back to the WWF. They didn't want NWO Hogan. They wanted the red and yellow, brother. And man, 2002, WrestleMania 18. That crowd in Toronto. Hogan was the bad guy in the NWO. Rock was the good guy. I mean, you would think The Rock was the bad guy. If you watch this match, and I'll tell you this: for if you have anyone that says to you they want to get into wrestling and what match should they watch, I can honestly tell you, Rock versus Hogan from WrestleMania 18 should be the first match they should watch, because that is the pinnacle of pro wrestling. Like Jim Ross, Jerry Lawler selling the way that they did on commentary to make you believe that this, like the magnitude of the match, the crowd going absolutely insane. The kind of the Rock and Hogan kind of trying to get the crowd to go one way, but the crowd would not go one way. They wanted to cheer Hogan. So this prompted the Vince McMahon to go, you know what? We're going to go back to the red and yellow. We're going to give Hogan the title. And boy, in 2002, based off the reaction he was getting, the fact that they put the WWF Championship back on him, and it was quite ironic that before the WWF switched to the WWE, that Hulk Hogan was officially the last WWF champion, and that is just so fitting, isn't it? But then we got to Montreal for SmackDown in, I think it was May. Montreal gave him a 10-minute, it felt like forever, but obviously this is when SmackDown was taped, so they cut it for time. But the crowd kept cheering him. They just gave him a standing ovation that seemingly went on forever. I was actually just watching the clip the other day. The absolute legacy that Hulk Hogan left behind in the ring, everything that he did for the business, and that would never be duplicated again. And like I said, 2002, the way the crowd was reacting to him when he came back, it felt he could start another boom period in the early 2000s. That's how over he was. And I think that's how much the fans respected Hulk Hogan, Hulk Hogan as a character, respected everything that he did for the business, for the industry, to make wrestling what it is. So from that retrospective, yeah, I feel like we can honor the guy that which the character, the character. So from that perspective, from everything that Hogan did from a character perspective on TV, I think we can celebrate that. I think, this isn't a situation of Chris Benoit, right? I think people are trying to make this a Chris Benoit situation where we can't talk about Hulk Hogan no more. To me, there's two different things here. Chris Benoit, I think, is a perfect example here, because Chris Benoit, the wrestler, Absolute great. He was great in the ring. He had great matches. But because of what Chris Benoit, the person, did in 2007 to his family, we can no longer talk about Chris Benoit, the wrestler. We cannot talk about the WrestleMania 20 main event because of what Chris Benoit, the person behind the character, did to his family. Which brings me to where we are now in his passing, the last couple years, 10 years, where I think a lot of fans, I think, are torn or split because, again, I think people are having a hard time uh, separating the character we see on TV from the person behind the camera. But in the case of Hulk Hogan, at some point along the way, Terry Bollea disappeared. The line between where Terry Bollea ended, where Hulk Hogan started, and when Hulk Hogan ended and when he went back to being Terry Bollea, that seemed to exist. That ceased to exist because it seemed like he became Hulk Hogan in everything he did, like every appearance, everything he did, he was Hulk Hogan. It wasn't Terry Bollea. So of course, fast forward to 10 years ago, ironically, 10 years ago, the tape gets released with the audio. We know what he said. And yeah, I mean, look, WWE was right in firing him. I don't condone what he said. I don't condone the actions of Terry Bollea, and what he said in that tape at all. And I do believe the fans had every right to boo him when he came back. The WWE would try to bring him back for these appearances, but the fans kind of rejected it, and rightfully so because again, we go back to what he said on the tape. He never fully apologized. It was more of a "I'm sorry, I got caught" type of thing, which kind of makes me wonder as I close this video out here, what would have been Hogan's legacy if that tape didn't get released? Because to me, I think we're looking at a whole different conversation right now. If that tape doesn't get made, if Hogan claims that Hogan claimed he didn't know about the tape, he didn't know he was being filmed, or again, like I don't know. Again, we don't know the truth. Only Bubba the Love Sponge can actually attest to that. But at the end of the day, he said what he said, which caused the mixed reaction that we're seeing about his passing. And I think it would be a whole lot different conversation. Like even right now, even with the political backlash that Hogan was getting over the past year or two, I still think fans might have been able to overlook that if it wasn't for that tape. I think that's a big giant what if. Because how many more segments would Hulk Hogan would have been in? How many more moments would he have been in? How many more appearances would he have made? What would the fans' opinion be of him if that tape? That's a big what if. Like to me, that's a big what if. Like if that tape doesn't get made, what conversation are we having, right? Because again, Vince McMahon's in the same boat. And at the end of the day, I said you can't mention Hulk Hogan without Vince McMahon. We can honor Hulk Hogan, the character, the beloved character we saw, the larger than life individual on TV. But at the same time, we can condemn the actions of Terry Bollea. And without Hulk Hogan, we are not here today talking wrestling. I don't even know what the shape of wrestling would be if it wasn't for them too. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, the legacies of Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon are simply complicated. Comment below. Let me know your thought. Let me know your favorite Hulk Hogan matches, moments, promos, whatever it may be. I've been your host, Money Mike, and you've been watching Ringside Cinema.